Fire in the sky, the boy who changed the climate. The sun hung low over the northern skies of Kachima, a village carved out of red earth and stubborn dreams. The dry harmattan wind blew softly through the mango trees, lifting dust in slow spirals. Water was fetched from a far borehole, and most of the children had learned to tell time by the way their shadows stretched across the cracked ground. Among them was 10-year-old Ton, wide-eyed and always barefoot, the kind of boy who saw patterns in clouds and heard secrets in the wind. He lived with his mother, Amina, and his grandfather, Baba Dogo, in a mud brick house surrounded by old shade trees. His father, a commercial motorcycle rider, had died in a flood 2 years earlier, one that came so suddenly it swept through their part of the village in the middle of the night. Ton remembered the flood not for the roar of the water, but for the silence that followed. Since that day, something in him changed. He noticed when the rains didn't come on time. He noticed when plants shriveled before they could flower. And he noticed that every year, the heat seemed to press harder on their backs like an invisible weight. "Grandpa," he asked one evening, squatting beside Baba Dogo who was weaving a basket, "why is the earth getting hotter?" Baba Dogo paused, his hands still. "It is angry," he replied slowly. "Or perhaps it is crying." That night, the wind was still. The lantern flickered on the floor, casting shadows that danced on the mud walls. Ton lay on his raffia mat, sweating under the weight of heat that refused to leave. He shut his eyes, but the silence outside whispered louder than usual. And then, he dreamed. In the dream, he stood on a hill of garbage, plastic bottles, black nylons, rusted cans, all piled high like a monument to waste. Smoke rose from the mountain, and the sun above glowed red, not golden. He turned around, and the village was gone. All he could see was dry land, cracked and lifeless. Suddenly, a voice called out, not loud, but clear, "If you do not change what you throw away, you will one day live in what you waste." Ton jolted awake, gasping. His chest rose and fell like a bellows. He sat up and reached for the empty water pot beside him, but it was dry. The next morning, as the sun crawled above the trees, Ton told his mother about the dream. She listened quietly, wrapping cassava dough with banana leaves. When he finished, she smiled gently. "You've always been different, Ton. Maybe the earth is speaking to you. But even if it is, what can a boy do?" Ton didn't know. But he knew one thing: he didn't want to be quiet anymore. That day at school, as Mr. Obi taught science beneath the mango tree, Ton asked, "Sir, what makes the earth hotter every year?" Mr. Obi's chalk paused in midair. He looked at the boy, eyes sharp behind dusty glasses. "It's called global warming," he said, "and it's real. Gases from our engines, factories, and burning waste trap heat in the sky. The ice melts, the weather changes, and the rain forgets how to come." The class went silent. Ton stared at the tree above them, its leaves already turning brown before their time. When the bell rang for lunch, he didn't go with the others. He walked to the edge of the village, to the place they called the dump. Flies buzzed over rotting tomatoes. Black polythene bags tangled in.
The morning sun filtered through thick layers of dust and dry heat as Ton paced along the edge of the dump, a makeshift notebook in his hand. He had borrowed it from Mr. Obi, who, though puzzled by the boy's sudden interest in global warming, had encouraged his curiosity. Each page was now filled with rough sketches of trees, compost pits, solar panels, and notes copied from science posters. That morning, Ton had a plan, though even he wasn't quite sure if it would work. He approached Baba Dogo, who sat by the neem tree carving a spoon from scrap wood. "Grandpa," he said, voice steady, "I want to plant trees." The old man paused. "Trees?" "Yes. Near the dump and by the school. I read that trees clean the air, give shade, and cool the earth." Baba Dogo looked at the boy long and quiet. Then he nodded once. "Then plant, my child. Even if you plant one, it is a start." That was all the permission Ton needed. He spoke with his schoolmates first, 3 boys and 2 girls who laughed but listened. "You know how hot it's been?" he asked. "And how the well is getting dry earlier than before?" They nodded. "We can't stop the sun, but we can grow shade. We can bring water back." Armed with watering cans made from old paint buckets and a wheelbarrow of compost, they began planting moringa and mango saplings beside the school fence. Each tree was marked with a name and watched daily like a pet. Soon, other students joined. Then their parents noticed. Some villagers scoffed. What will trees do? Can they pay school fees or bring back rain? But others, especially the mothers who fetched water daily, began to understand. Ton explained, when trees grow, the ground holds more water. When we burn less waste, the air stays cleaner. These little things build into bigger things. It was not magic, but science. It was not fast, but it was sure. By the end of that term, the schoolyard had 32 young trees, a simple compost pit behind the kitchen, and new waste. Ton had never been outside Kachima. His world was the school, the dump, the boho, and the thorny footpath that led to his grandmother's cassava farm. But everything changed the day Mr. Obi returned from a teacher's workshop in the city and brought a surprise. "We're going on a trip," he announced one Monday morning. "A real forest. A conservation center. You will see how the land heals when we protect it." The students cheered. Ton blinked in disbelief. 2 days later, they boarded an old bus and traveled for hours until the dirt turned to gravel and then to red clay roads wrapped in green. For the first time, Ton saw trees so tall they seemed to touch the clouds. He breathed deeply. The air smelled wet and alive. They arrived at the Goshoka Gumti Forest Reserve, one of Nigeria's largest protected areas. A forest ranger, Mama Yaro, welcomed them. She wore rubber boots and carried a notebook filled with bird drawings. She led them through winding trails, explaining how every plant and animal played a role in nature's balance. "When you cut too many trees," she said, "the soil runs away with the rain. The rivers dry. But when you protect the forest, it protects you too." They saw streams that flowed clear and cold, monkeys swinging between branches, and fallen leaves that fed the earth. That evening, as they gathered around a small campfire, Mama Yaro told a story. "There was a village once, not unlike yours. They cut the forest for wood, burned the land for farms. The soil died. The crops failed. But when they began planting again, slowly, with care, the birds returned. Then the rain. And the land lived again." Ton didn't sleep much that night. His head buzzed with ideas: composting toilets, fuel-efficient stoves, community tree nurseries, even a reading program under the trees. He wrote notes by flashlight, whispering, "If the forest can heal, then so can my village." When they returned to Kachima, Ton was no longer just a curious boy. He was. Ton, the power went out again in Kachima. Not that it ever stayed long. The village's few electric poles buzzed faintly at night when they worked, but most homes relied on kerosene lamps, firewood, or just moonlight. One evening, while trying to finish his science notes by candlelight, Ton coughed from the thick smoke curling from the lantern. He wiped his eyes and muttered, "There has to be a better way." The next day at school, Mr. Obi introduced a new science topic: renewable energy. "Solar power," he explained, "comes from the sun. It's clean, quiet, and endless. Imagine lighting your home with just sunlight." Ton leaned in, wide-eyed. His mind raced. The sun. That same hot sun that made the earth sweat and the sand burn his feet. Could it also help? That afternoon, Ton borrowed Mr. Obi's tablet to research more. He learned how solar panels worked, photovoltaic cells turning sunlight into electricity. He saw pictures of villages in Kenya, India, and northern Nigeria where students studied under solar lanterns and homes lit up with rooftop panels. A plan began to form in his mind. A crazy one. He gathered the Green Club after school. What if we could bring light to the school, real, clean light? "But solar panels are expensive," said Ifioma, the club's treasurer. "I know," Ton replied. "But if every parent gives a little, and we hold a village fundraiser?" They decided to act. They drew posters: "Let the sun shine on our school." They went house to house explaining how solar panels could power lights, fans, and even a phone charger. They performed a short drama in the market square showing a student choking on kerosene smoke versus one reading with solar light. Ton had learned the greatest truth of all: nature is not broken, it is waiting for us to listen, waiting for us to care. At first, people laughed. Solar. For this village. PP, but the children's passion was contagious. Parents began donating bags of rice, hand-woven basket. Ton, the power went out again in even small naira notes. A carpenter offered to build a frame. Mr. Obi connected them with a local solar NGO. 3 months later, it happened. On a Saturday morning, the Green Club stood barefoot on the school roof as technicians installed the small but mighty panels. Wires were run, batteries connected, and switches mounted. That evening, the schoolyard glowed. It was not just light, it was hope, shining out of concrete walls and onto the faces of children who had only known shadows. Thorn stared at the bright bulbs above the blackboard and whispered, "The sun that once burned us now powers us." From that day forward, evening lessons resumed, adult literacy classes began, and even weekend film nights were held, with a projector run on clean energy. Thorn's dream was no longer just about trees and trash. It was now about light, power, possibility. Thorn was now 12, and the village of Kachima was changing. Trees lined the schoolyard, waste bins stood at every corner, and solar panels quietly hummed above classroom roofs. But outside the school gates, the dump still grew, the river remained clogged with plastic, and some villagers still burned their trash each evening, clouding the sky with black smoke. Thorn knew change was never easy. But it was time to go further. He began attending village council meetings with Mr. Obi and Mama Yaro, who had become a close ally. The room was filled with older men and women, many of whom had lived through famines, floods, and failed government promises. They respected tradition and looked at Thorn with skeptical eyes. "You want a waste separation law?" the village head, Chief Lawal, asked during one meeting. "Do you know how long we've thrown everything in one place?" Thorn stood straight. "Yes, sir. But now we know better. We know that burning plastic poisons our air. We know that mixing food waste with metal and glass makes it harder to compost or recycle." Some laughed quietly. Others listened. Mama Yaro added, "Let's start small. A waste-free market day. And bins labeled for plastic, food, and metals." After much debate, the council agreed, reluctantly, to try it for 1 month. Thorn, the Green Club, and volunteers from the school created colorful signs, recycled drums into bins, and held a street parade shouting, "Separate your waste, save our land." The first waste-free market day arrived. At first, chaos. People tossed trash everywhere. But then, slowly, with encouragement and help, they began to place items correctly. Children helped adults. Shopkeepers started keeping their corners clean. By the fourth market day, something unexpected happened: less trash. And something even better, a cleaner path to the river. Still, not everyone was happy. One evening, Thorn found the bins tipped over, signs torn, and compost scattered. He stood silently, staring at the mess. "People fear change," Mr. Obi said, joining him. "Especially when it comes from a child." Thorn didn't speak. He bent down and began cleaning. One by one, other students arrived. They cleaned too. By morning, the market square looked even better than before. That week, a journalist from a national radio station came to Kachima. She had heard of a boy leading a climate revolution in a small village and wanted to see it for herself. She interviewed Thorn under the mango tree where it all began. "What made you do all this?" she asked. Thorn looked into the lens and said, "Because we cannot wait. If we wait for the government, or money, or the perfect time, we will wait until we drown. But if we begin now, small, we can build something big." The radio program aired across the region. Other villages began to call. Schools wanted to learn. NGOs offered support. What began as one boy's dream had become a movement, but Thorn knew the real work was just beginning. It had been nearly 3 years since the Great Flood took Thorn's father. Since then, the rains had become strange, either too much or too little, arriving late, or not at all. The village soil cracked from thirst or drowned from sudden storms. Farmers whispered that the sky no longer listened, but this year, something was different. The clouds rolled in steadily, heavy with promise. The wind cooled. Thunder growled in the hills, not in anger, but in rhythm. And when the rain finally fell, it came in long, patient sheets, not like a curse, but like a blessing. Thorn stood barefoot in the middle of the schoolyard as the first drops struck the leaves of the young trees he had planted 2 years before. He smiled as the water trickled down the mango bark, pulling gently at its roots. The tree nursery behind the school now brimmed with over 200 seedlings: neem, morina, cashew, and acacia, all ready to be transplanted into the wider village. Compost from kitchen scraps had made the soil rich again. Rainwater harvesting barrels, installed behind the classrooms, now filled up within hours. That week, the Green Club launched their most ambitious project yet, the River Shield. With help from parents, farmers, and even the once reluctant council elders, they planted native grasses and bamboo shoots along the edges of the village riverbank. "This will hold the soil," Thorn explained to a group of younger students. "So when the rain falls, the river stays where it should." That rainy season, something miraculous happened. The water came, but the floods did not. The trees held the ground, the compost fed the fields, the children stayed dry, one elderly farmer, who had once mocked the Green Club, stood beside his healthy maize crop and shook his head in awe. This small boy and his trees. They've brought back the rain like our grandfathers used to know it. Ton didn't take credit. He simply kept walking, one afternoon, as he passed the solar.
The radio interview had traveled farther than Ton could have imagined. A teacher in Enugu played it during her environmental studies class. A journalist in Abuja wrote a feature story titled, "The Boy Who Grew Trees." A senator mentioned the Kachima Green Club during a national debate on climate education, but the moment everything changed came on a warm Tuesday morning. The school had just resumed after the rainy season break. Tund was helping a group of new students prepare compost when a white van pulled up in front of the school gate. Out stepped a woman in a green suit and glasses, followed by 2 cameramen and a smiling official with a Ministry of Environment badge. She introduced herself as the special advisor on climate policy to the federal government. "I've heard of what you've done here," she said, turning to Tund. "We've all heard. And we'd like you to speak at the National Youth Environmental Forum in Abuja." The students gasped. Tund stared, speechless. "Will I go alone?" he finally asked. The woman smiled. "No. We want your whole Green Club to come. Kachima has something to teach the world." 2 weeks later, Tund stood behind a polished podium in a hall filled with students, government officials, scientists, and foreign ambassadors. His hands trembled at first, but when he looked out into the crowd and saw Mr. Obi, Mama Yarrow, and his mother smiling in the front row, he took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. "We didn't wait for change. We became it. We started with small things, trees, bins, water barrels, but those small things changed our school, our village, and now, maybe, our country. We didn't have much money. We had no generator. But we had sunlight. And we had ideas, and most of all, we had hope. Every child in Nigeria should be taught to understand the earth, not just its beauty, but its pain. And every school should be more than a place of learning, it should be a place of action." When he finished, the hall erupted in applause. Back in Kachima, Tund returned to planting, just as he always had, only now, children from nearby villages came to learn from him. Farmers asked for advice. Even the old dump site had been transformed into a green garden with benches, learning signs, and rows of cassava and yams. One quiet evening, Tund carved a message into a wooden sign and placed it at the school gate. It read, "We don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children." And below that, in smaller letters, "The Green Club, Kachima. Please like and subscribe to this channel."